So the information contained in this presentation is provided as a reference only. Charter schools and chartering authorities are encouraged to review the laws and regulations and consult with their own legal counsel regarding the application to their specific situations. So next slide, please. Our agenda today is going to cover two special presentations. We will talk about current updates, hot topics, breakout rooms, and question and answer. As a reminder, please keep yourself muted. You may put questions in the chat, and there will be a Q&A at the end. This session is being recorded. However, we will be only recording in the main room. The breakout rooms are not recorded. On the agenda today, as I said, we're going to remind you what's in the parking lot, and we will be having two special presentations. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce you to the SCCOE team, and next slide to the CCAP team. We are the sub-recipients for CASI. And next slide, I'd like to turn it over to Dave to share about our upcoming presentation.
Okay, we have a few things that are coming up. We want to make sure you've got on your calendar. The next monthly charter chat is April 24th, our normal 10 to 11. We also have our CASI quarterly training coming up, Road to Renewal, on April 19th. That's a 2-hour piece. It's from 9 to 11. It's virtual. There's information in the chat that'll talk about how to register. Next slide, please. We also want to just make sure you're aware that we are on the road. We'll be more than happy to come to your locale. Sometimes that works very well where we work with someone from a county office, for example, and they bring others together in the region. That works very well for all of us. And an example of that, we want to thank John Alvarez from Tulare County Office of Ed and all who attended the March 11th training that we did in Visalia. Next slide, and back to you. Oh, no, it's still back to me. Sorry. Conference, yes. How can I forget? The CCAP conference is June 18th to 21st. It's in the Irvine Marriott. We have some solid CASI activities relating to charter school oversight and authorizing 101 on the 18th and 19th. Two half days. It works really well. There is an opportunity for reimbursement for hotel rooms for those authorizers that have 1 to 5 schools and or not more than 2 dedicated staff. So we all know finances are an issue this year. There is an opportunity for the smaller shops to have the opportunity to still be there. And we'll also have CASI throughout the main program also. Information about that is on the website for CCAP, and the link is right there also. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So there's also on May 10th, the Charter Authorizer Connection Professional Learning. They are also doing a charter school renewal presentation. So you're more than welcome to join them on May 10th from 9 to 11. On the resource page will be the registration information. Next slide, please. So we do have a parking lot. We've received questions on a variety of topics. Some we do not have the answers for, but we are collaborating and with the appropriate divisions at the department where guidance is being developed. So we just wanted to let you know that we haven't forgotten any of these. We get the information to you as soon as we can. Next slide, please. So this is your opportunity to make sure that you rename yourself, which I need to do myself. Please make sure that you put your name and your organization behind your name so that as we go into the regional breakout rooms that people will know who you are and where you are hailing from. Next slide, please. So here on the next 2 slides, we have some information about the legislative updates. Right now, they are going through the process. We do not have any new information for you, but they are moving through the legislative process. Next slide, please. So you can look up all of this information. It is a link on the resource page, and you will be able to find out all the information for these. Next slide, please. So the California State Board of Education meeting was held on March 6th. A charter school number was considered, and the next meeting will be held on May 8th and 9th. The Advisory Commission on Charter Schools, that February meeting was canceled, and their next meeting is scheduled for April 9th. So if you'd like more information on either one of these, the links are on the resource page. Next slide, please. All right. So we are now moving into hot topics. We actually have two guest presenters today. One from CDE's Analysis Measurement Accountability Division, AMARD, and the other will be by LAO and FCMAT on their recently report. So the first will be Kim Mundhang, and she's the administrator for AMARD. So I'm going to turn this over to AMARD.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kimberly Muntank. I'm an administrator of the Accountability Development and Policy Analysis Unit at the California Department of Education. And I'm happy today to walk through the recently released 2024 charter school performance categories. Next slide. Oh, there you go. So what we're going to walk through real quick for you today is how the California School Dashboard and the outcomes that you see displayed on our state and federal accountability system have been linked to charter renewal process through Assembly Bill 1505, which passed in 2019, and exactly how those results on the dashboard inform the different renewal tracks that are available. Next slide. So on the dashboard, we create performance levels, also known as colors. And those performance levels are designated from lowest performance of a color of red, and then in ascending order from orange, yellow, green to blue to our highest level performance. Overall, the goal for the state, if you see in my lovely logo in my picture, you'll see that the arrow points to green in the California School Dashboard logo. And the reason for that is that overall, the goal for the state for all schools, districts, and student groups is to reach green on the dashboard. And if you hit blue, that's just a little bit extra. However, that is the overall goal for the state. So when we're looking at top performance, that's what we're looking. When we look at support designations for our federal and state accountability systems, those designations are reached through either scoring red or orange on the dashboard, or a combination of such. So across our differentiated assistance for our state accountability system, it's a combination of those two colors, as well as for our federal identification under ESSA. So when we're looking for places that need assistance and support and are not doing the things we're looking for in the state, right, on those indicators, you'll see colors of red and orange. And if we are seeing success in those indicators, we're looking at the colors green and blue. Next slide. So overall, again, the purpose of the California School Dashboard is to serve as the state and federal accountability system. It is the product of the LCFF legislation from 2013 and is rationalized in a set of multiple measures across 10 priority areas to measure how schools, districts, and student groups are performing across all of those areas. And overall, we're looking to promote continuous improvement across all student groups. And so that would bubble up to schools and bubble up to states. and bubble up to districts as well. So what we're looking for overall, again, is to see continuous improvement, and that's how the color scheme works. Over time, however, the dashboard has been adopted and utilized for other purposes. So following its inception in 2017, we've seen the dashboard colors utilized to make determinations for the Distinguished Schools program. We've seen it for blue ribbon schools. We've seen it in grant applications that folks require different things. Just this week, I received an email from a housing development coordinator who's looking to know how the colors performed for where their low-income schools, or if any low-income schools in their neighborhood had high optimal colors in our state accountability system. So again, the dashboard's been utilized for many things outside of its original purpose for school, federal and state identification for support. And that is how we've gotten to the dashboard being utilized for renewal determinations for charter schools. Next slide. AB 1505 was passed in 2019 in order to basically link dashboard outcomes to charter renewal. And effective on July 1st, 2020, charter schools received a performance category based on Education Code criteria on their dashboard performance for the past 2 years. And so those first initial designations were released in 2020. If that is not, memorable to any of us, because remember, this was July 2020, that might be why we don't think of it as when it happened. But it was based on the 2019 and 2018 dashboard. We had a suspended dashboard for 2020 and a suspended dashboard in 2021. And in 2022, the dashboard came back with status only for our performance levels and did not have full colors. Therefore, we were unable to issue another issuance of our performance categories list until this current year. Next slide. The 3 possible performance categories per AB 1505 are as follows. You can receive a high designation, which would place your charter school for eligibility for a 5, 6, or 7-year renewal term. Middle performs allows it to be renewed for a 5-year term. And low, any charter schools in this category can be renewed for a 2-year term if they meet the conditions under Additional Education Code as per AB 1505. Next slide. Other way. There we go. So let's walk through exactly what occurred within this year's performance categories file. There are 2 ways to get a performance category. Criterion 1, which is your overall colors for the dashboard at the overall school level. And then Criterion 2 is for any schools that do not receive a designation under Criterion 1. Then we look at your overall status on the dashboard for academic indicators for the school level and your student group levels. So that's the actual number that you receive for those indicators. Next slide. To be eligible for Criterion 1, first you need to have 2 or more academic indicators with a school color in both years for ELA, math, college, career, and or LB. So you need to have 2 within those categories. And for this year's designations, next slide. You need to have for Criterion 1, blue or green on all school indicators for both years. Next slide. And for low, you need to have red or orange on all indicators in both years. Next slide. So for this year, we saw 9 charter schools receive a high category and 2 charter schools receive a low category per the Criterion 1 qualifications. That left 1,138 charter schools to move on to consideration under the criteria for Criterion 2. Next slide. So for Criterion 2, we have that same caveat that you need to have 2 or more academic indicators overall for your school with a color in both 2022 as well as 2023. Additionally, you also have to have 2 eligible student groups with a color that are not, and when I say eligible student groups, it means that they're underperforming student groups. 4 student groups do not qualify as underperforming within the state of California per AB 1505, and those 4 student groups are white, Asian, 2 or more races, and Filipino. So if you do not have 2 or more eligible student groups outside of those 4, then you would not qualify under criterion 2 for looking at eligibility. Next slide. For criterion 2, we're looking at school status higher than the state for both academic indicators in both years, and a majority of eligible student groups with a status higher than the state in academic for both years. For criterion for low, it's the same, just reversed. Next slide. We're looking at status lower than the state, and as well as status lower for all of your eligible student groups as well. Next slide. So when we look at the state overall for 2024 and the 2023 and 22 dashboards, we see that 201 schools earned the high category designation under criterion 2, and 95 schools received the low designation under criterion 2. Next slide. This leaves 842 schools in the middle category. Of those, 601 did not meet the criteria for 1 or 2. They did not match the requirements to receive a designation for either of those criteria. However, 241 of those charter schools never met the eligibility criteria to even be considered under criterion 1 or 2. This is likely because of small school size, small N size, and or not having eligible student groups, eligible underperforming student groups to be evaluated under criterion 2. Next slide. If you have any questions about how the charter performance categories were designated or what goes through there, I will send your questions over to charters@cde.ca.gov. However, if you have any questions about how the dashboard operates, how those colors were received, and or how exactly folks got to those colors in any year, please reach out to questions around the dashboard at our email address, dashboard@cde.ca.gov. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you. So next slide. So we have a few slides in the appendix.
And these provide the status levels overall for folks if you're looking to see what the status is. So I've provided those within the appendix just so that you have the opportunity to flip through and see what those state statuses are, at least for 2023.
Great. Thank you. All right, so next we will be joined by Michael Alvarez from the Legislative Analyst Office and Michael Fine from the Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team, or FCMAT, to share the overview of the recently released review of the funding determination process for non-classroom-based charter schools reports.
And you're actually going to get Michelle Giacomini instead of Fine, if that's all right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Michelle Giacomini is one of my favorite people, so absolutely.
I'm not as bossy as Michael. Well, sometimes I am. But...
I beg to differ.
Robbie, you don't get to talk today.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So Michael Alvarez with the LAO. So I'm joined with Michelle Giacomini from FCMAT. So we're here today to talk about the report that we just published together, LAO and FCMAT, recently related to non-classroom based charter schools. So this report was required by law, and the requirement was added as part of last year's budget. Specifically, we were required to identify and make recommendations to improve the funding determination process for non-classroom based charter schools, including recommendations for enhancing oversight and reducing fraud, waste, and abuse. Can I get the next slide, please? One more. One more slide, please.
If you could go one more slide, please. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so that wasn't part of my introduction. Sorry, this is my first time going through and I wasn't in control of the slides, so this is a little disheartening. Can I get one more slide? Yeah, so state law classifies charter schools as not classroom based or classroom based. A school is considered non classroom based if more than 20% of attendance is not classroom based. There are in the current year 313 non-classroom-based charter schools, representing less than 4% of statewide attendance, but they make up a larger share of overall charter school attendance, about a third. So to receive full funding for non-classroom based attendance, schools must submit funding determinations to CDE with 3 requirements: this spending on certificated staff, compensation, spending on instruction related services, and student to teacher ratio, which you'll see. Can I get one more slide? These are the kind of 3 thresholds that I mentioned, and you can see the spending level that, or the funding level that a charter school would receive was dependent on their kind of meeting these 3 criteria. So this process has been in place for about 20 years. The intent initially, our understanding, was to reduce profiteering for schools that had kind of cost structures that might have been not as dependent on facilities and other things. There were some kind of high-profile cases, and this was kind of the solution that came about 20 years ago. And currently, there's a moratorium that exists for preventing new non-classroom based charter schools from establishing, which would expire on January 2026. So we were asked to look at ways to improve the process kind of before this moratorium expires. Next slide, please. One more slide. Thank you. So we had 3 kind of overall key findings. The first is that the term non-classroom based is a misnomer, and that this is not really an accurate reflection of many of the programs that are considered non-classroom based today. Second, the funding determination process has gaps that make it less effective in monitoring school spending. And lastly, we found that the process is not an effective way to address other issues such as fraud, waste, and abuse. So the rest of the presentation will be divided into sort of 2 parts. I'll walk through the recommendations specific to the funding determination process, and then I'll pass things over to Michelle, who will cover our recommendations on areas outside of the funding determination process for broader oversight of charter schools. Next slide, please. One more slide. So just starting on the kind of categorization, the definition of non-classroom based charter schools, based on this self-reported data that you can see here in this figure, about half of attendance at schools, at non-classroom based charter schools, is either primarily virtual or exclusively virtual. But you can see the largest share of the attendance in these schools is in the not virtual, meaning that they don't have any sort of virtual components. So this was kind of confirmed with our conversations with some programs that, some were virtual, but many had significant in-person components through hybrids or other types of kind of homeschools was another kind of big category of schools that we talked to. For these types of schools, the cost structure may be more similar to classroom-based programs. One more slide. So because of this, we're recommending narrowing the definition to a smaller subset of schools. We didn't think that there was a kind of particular kind of perfect place to draw this line, but we thought a good starting place was to have the definition be for schools that have more than half of their attendance being non-classroom based, that they would be considered non-classroom based. This would be, instead of the 20%, more than 20%, more than half. So this would kind of narrow it to this some smaller subset of schools. We're also recommending creating the definitions for virtual charter schools and virtual charter networks in statute. There's in regulations, there's a definition for virtual schools that's 80% of instruction that occurs online or virtual, and we think that this might be a reasonable kind of starting point to have this definition. We just think that it would be better to include in statute and then have this be a designation that's kind of audited and would allow for kind of tracking. Similarly, on kind of virtual charter networks, there's a definition that exists in statute for kind of entities that manage charter schools, but we think that this definition would be more for kind of getting at schools that might not necessarily have the same CMO or charter management organization, but they operate kind of as one school system, and they kind of share resources or staff across the school sites. Next slide. So in our report, we make several recommendations to change certain aspects of the funding determination process based on our conversations we had with California Department of Education and charter school folks over the fall. And at a high level, our recommendations are intended to kind of both improve the quality of data that's submitted to CDE and eliminate gaps that exist in the current process while streamlining certain aspects of the process. So I'll start off with our first set of recommendations around requiring additional review of data submitted to CDE. Next slide. So just for some context, in our conversations with CDE, they indicated that in their review of funding determination requests, they routinely compare information that charter schools submit with prior year audits. That allows them to kind of verify the expenditure data and then allows them to conduct their own independent calculation for the specific spending thresholds. However, there's some information reported in the funding determination form that is self-certified and cannot be easily verified by CDE. So two of these components of the form that are self-certified are that certificated staff compensation included towards the spending threshold is for positions that provide direct instruction to students. So regulations make it clear that only certificated salaries that are for positions that provide direct instruction can be included, but there's no way for the CD to verify whether there might be an administrator that has a credential, for example, that isn't providing direct instruction, have their salaries be included towards meeting the threshold. And so the second piece is on the student to teacher ratios. There's no way this isn't audited. And so we make recommendations to kind of have these two pieces of information be included in charter school audits. And for the first, on the certificated salaries threshold, to create consistency and make it easier for CDE to verify, we're recommending the legislature take a different approach for measuring spending on certificated staff. Specifically, we're recommending non-classroom-based charter schools be required to meet this requirement using the current expense of education calculations that school districts currently are required to do under current law. This is a kind of existing calculation that is included in school district audits and would be able to make it more streamlined and for CDE to kind of be able to have this information verified through an external entity. For the second piece, we are just recommending that non-classroom based charter schools have their student to teacher ratios being verified through the annual audit process, which would just make it easier for CDE to confirm whether schools met this requirement. Additionally, we raised in the report that CDE indicated that there's often a challenge of verifying data for some kind of locally funded charter schools that might be dependent charters, as colloquially used. This would be for, this was in practice is some authorizers might have some charter school spending within their audits. And this doesn't allow CDE to kind of be able to independently look at the spending of the charter school when the charter school is treated as another school within the authorizer, for example. So for these schools, we're just recommending that any authorizer that does have charter school spending data within their audits, that just be tracked separately. We think that this could be used just using different fund codes, for example, and it's not in kind of a complicated fix. Can I get the next slide? So moving on to kind of our next set of recommendations, we're recommending that the state move towards aligning the length of funding determinations with charter school renewals. Aligning these timelines would likely result in reducing the administrative burden for both schools and CDE to kind of ensure consistency and transparency. We're also recommending codifying in statute the rules regarding the length of a funding determination. As in our conversation, some folks expressed that this was not always clear. We're also recommending the funding determination take into consideration a school's aggregate spending for all years since the previous funding determination, instead of the current practice of just looking at current year only. This would kind of ensure that school expenditures are aligned with the funding funding determination thresholds over time, not just in the year prior to the funding determinations. Looking at aggregate spending over the funding determination period might also reduce some of the need for mitigating circumstances if school is slightly below the threshold in 1 year and is meeting the threshold or is above the threshold in all the other years. Though we are recommending for schools to submit forms to CDE in each intervening year, and that CDE would just review these on an interim basis, just to kind of serve as a kind of a check to see if, you know, if they have a 5-year funding determination, for example, in year 3, CDE could see if they expect the school to be meeting the threshold or not. And if schools are significantly below meeting the threshold or look like they might not be able to, then CDE can notify the charter school so that they would be able to have sort of heads up, or CDE could also maybe in our recommendation revisit the school's funding determination in an intervening year. Lastly, on this piece, we also make recommendations specific to networks of non-classroom based charter schools that effectively operate as one school system. We recommend that each school within the network be up for funding determinations in the same year. This would allow for a more comprehensive view of program expenditures and ensure that it can be determined whether the network as a whole is in compliance with the funding determination levels that it's received. And it also eliminates for any opportunity for the charter schools within the network to manipulate any data relevant to various spending thresholds and the student-teacher ratios requirement. Next slide. So we are kind of making 2 recommendations for building in automatic adjustments for one-time funds and for facilities. Regarding one-time funds, we're just recommending modifying the funding determination form to automatically exclude one from the instruction and related services threshold any unspent revenues from one-time funds appropriated in that year. This would ensure that schools are not penalized for spending one-time funds over multiple years, consistent with typical state requirements. We're also recommending that facility costs be counted as instruction-related spending as long as the facilities are primarily used to provide in-person instruction and backup information is provided that confirms the costs. These adjustments are kind of just meant to address some of the common reasons that we heard from folks charter schools that resulted in them not meeting the instruction and related services threshold and then having to rely on the mitigating circumstances. So with these adjustments, we think these together would likely result in less need for charter schools needing to use mitigating circumstances. Lastly, we make kind of several recommendations to modify how reserves are addressed in the funding determination form. And the major one, I think, is just we're trying not to penalize folks for making additional deposits into the reserves as long as they are their reserves are less than 10% of their total revenues. One more slide. Yeah, so kind of these are our recommendations specific to the funding determination process itself. Again, the goals of the recommendations are to narrow the process to a smaller subset of schools, improving the comprehensiveness and quality of data submitted to CDE, and streamline certain aspects of the process. Though, kind of with our overall findings, we think that this would eliminate some gaps that exist in the process, though the funding determination process does rely on other aspects of the system to be working effectively. And so this process in and of itself isn't a great way to kind of reduce fraud, waste, and abuse. So in our review, we identified areas outside of the funding determination process that the state could take actions on to better prevent issues of fraud and misappropriation of funds. So with that, I'll pass it to Michelle, who will cover kind of our comments around requirements for authorizers and audits and transparency and conflict of interest.
Thank you. Okay, so if we could go, I get the fun thing with oversight. Thank you, which is why this group is really here as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things that after talking to everyone is we do want to, as we all know, in law, there aren't really many requirements for authorizers that are spelled out, right? It's pretty minimal as far as what the requirements are. So we think we have a recommendation that the requirements for authorizers should be better spelled out. What does it mean as far as what are the requirements for authorizers? So we think that the minimum requirements for authorizers should be increased, better spelled out as far as what are those requirements. They're very basic. And so we think those should be better specified because it's all over the place, as we know, statewide. And so let's talk about those a little bit and better specify what that means. We also think that the limits should be, we should talk about what there should be limits based on the size of the district and what type of, when a charter petition comes forward, if the charter petition is for a charter that is much larger than the district that it's coming to, there should be limits on that. We've seen time and time again that as the charter petition comes forward and the charter is much larger than the district that they're coming to, that we've seen trouble time and time again. So we'd like to talk about some limits on that. And so that's what the second bullet is about. And we've seen that with 8.3 in different cases. So that's what the second bullet is about. The third bullet is about higher reimbursement on oversight. That's the 1%, for instance. But remember, that's on actual costs of oversight. And that's still the topic that we don't do well statewide. We hear time and time again that we don't get enough reimbursement for our oversight costs. But we still don't do a good job statewide of tracking what our real costs are on oversight. So we're going to have to do a better job then on tracking what our real costs are on oversight. So if we're going to get a higher reimbursement on our oversight costs, we're going to have to start tracking what we're really spending on oversight. So we can't really ask for more reimbursement on oversight if we're not really tracking it. So we can't forget what that our actual costs of oversight are. So higher reimbursement for spending on actual costs of oversight, right? And we've talked about that a lot. And then an alternative authorizing structure for virtual schools. We have recommendations in there for maybe all virtual schools are authorized by one specific kind of entity, which we know is a little different than what we do now with local control, right? But maybe there's one entity that approves all virtual schools. Maybe that looks different than we do it now, or there's one entity that oversees all virtual schools. How did I do with that, Michael? Does that sound kind of?
Yeah, we do make a recommendation that was one option, or the other would be if there's an entity that has expertise that kind of works with authorizers and trying to look at all the spending at one time, for example, across the networks of the virtual schools.
Which is very different than how we do it now. But, this may be an area where we need more expertise than we have now. This is really an area that is specialized. And so that's something that we may need to do different than we're doing now. Next slide, please. So we wanted to really share information on how we have so many small school districts who are authorizing such large non-classroom based charter schools. And it's really interesting when you look at the data of how you have large non-classroom based charter schools really going to such small school districts. And so that's really where this recommendation comes from. And it is kind of staggering when you look at how much larger these non-classroom based charter schools. I mean, we know it and we hear it, right? But when you look at the numbers where non-classroom based charter schools are really going to small school districts, and that's where this recommendation comes from. We're looking at some alternative way of of having some type of special entity or someone that, or some entity that specializes in non-classroom based or virtual school that can specialize in giving expert opinions and how to help with this type of specialized schooling, we think would be a good recommendation. Because going to such small school districts, there's really no one to provide good oversight to these schools. And so this is the data that backs up the recommendation that we've provided in this report. Next slide, please. As far as audits, we have recommendations in the report as far as in the area of audits. As far as right now, if you look in the ed code, there isn't really language to provide the same conformity in the language as far as school districts. So we'd like to change the language in code so that the process for school district audits is the same as for charter schools. So the language is clearer. A lot of times it's interpreted to be the same. But if you notice right now, when petitions are brought forward, it needs to be in the petition that the audit is going to be the same process as it is for school districts. Well, why not just clean up the language in code so that we know that it's going to be the same as it is for school districts? So that would be much simpler. We'd also like to ensure that the audit guide addresses what the sampling is going to look like for non-classroom based charter schools. Let's just put it out at front. What is the sampling going to need to look like so that it's not left up to the auditors or the charter schools at the time of the audit? And we'd also like to develop a materiality, I can't talk today, level for charter schools. Let's put it all up at the front so that we know up front what all of that's going to be. And it doesn't really differ by charter school, by non-classroom based charter school later. So it's not different. Let's just put it all up front. Let's strategize and talk about what the audits need to look like. This has become a real issue. And then afterwards, it becomes an issue. So we'd like to we have recommendations in all of this area with audits, which has become a real issue and a hot topic around the state. Next slide, please. And then in the area where we've had a lot of issues with A3 and Inspire and a lot of different non-classroom based schools is we'd like to find, we have recommendations in the area of how we can stop this issue of not knowing where schools go and where students are going, and sometimes double enrolling and not being able to track where students are going. So more disclosure in the area of where students are actually going and being able to track where they're actually going. So some supplemental schedules and being able to track where the ADA is. So we have recommendations of different schedules of being able to see where the students are going and being able to track their ADA. So you'll see recommendations in that area, as well as specific auditor training. Which I think that you'll be seeing recommendations and other reports that are happening around the state as well. So I don't think some of these are new recommendations for any of you. Next slide. As far as in the area of transparency and conflict of interest, all of the information on this slide are actually information that are already in the funding determination form. And these recommendations are actually information that is in the funding determination form. We're actually asking that are also going to be in the audit as well. So this isn't additional information that would have to be put together. It's just information that is in the funding determination form. We're actually asking that it's also in the audit as well, because people aren't actually looking at the funding determination form other than really CDE, right? The charter school is putting together the funding determination form, submitting it to CDE, but we're asking that that information also be in the audit as well, which is more of a public document. And that would help then the public to see that that this information, which would help get rid of a lot of this misnomer of what is and what isn't. So we're asking that charter schools publicly disclose this information on related organizations, as well as the information that is in their funding determination form, which we think would help a lot in just publicly showing this information that everybody is very interested in, and wouldn't be a lot of extra work because they're already putting this information together. Next slide, please. Okay. So that is the report, which Michael and I can tell you, we started meetings last July, right, Michael? July, June.
Well, I was on paternity leave for the first 3
Yeah,
months.
it's before Michael had a baby, right?
Yeah,
Which now
but-
seems like the baby's almost walking, right? Just
yeah,
kidding.
he is almost. But yeah, we met with plenty of folks, charter school folks over the fall. Michelle and Mike and Edgar Cabral, the deputy of the K-12 unit at the LAO, who couldn't make it today. But yeah, that's our main takeaways, main findings and recommendations.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you both so much for the information. I'm going to turn this over temporarily to Susan Park, who is the director over at CDE. And so, Susan, you had an announcement.
Thanks, Dr. Jensen. Hi, everybody. My name's Susan Park. I'm the California Department of Education Charter Schools Director. I just want to thank Michael and Michelle again. LAO and FCMAT have been so active at not only presenting the information to CDE staff, but to our authorizers, and recently at the California Charter Schools Association. So LAO and FCMAT have just been non-tiring of making sure this important information is reaching all different levels and audiences. And so thank you for presenting it to Cassie so we can record it and share it. The report is not long. It's dense, but it's not long. You can read through it, and the table that Michelle shared is one of my favorite eye-popping epiphany moments about non-classroom based authorizing. So Michael, congratulations belatedly on your baby, and Michelle, thanks for being part of the team to get the information out there, the recommendations that we're reviewing quite intensively here at CDE. I also wanted to share that we wanted to give LAO and FCMAT space to be very thorough, and that meant we cut off Kimberly Mundenk. So if you felt Kim's presentation, you wanted to know more about the dashboard, we agree with you. It's also a dense, complex area. So very soon, we will be posting a recorded webinar with a longer version of her dashboard presentation, really targeted to charter schools and authorizers to understand the low, middle, high calculations. There's some very technical nuances about when the threshold number is 15 students, when it's 30 students, and Kim does a super detailed presentation that happened yesterday as a webinar. If you missed it or you want to listen to it again, you want to listen to it on the treadmill, you want to listen to it while you walk your dog, because I learn more about it every time I hear it. Thanks, Amanda. It was a great presentation. She walks you through a school example. She walks you through criterion 1, criterion 2. So if you like that, if you want to make sure you understand it before you're going before your board with the first post AB 1505 renewal ever in your district, we will post the slides, and I believe we will be posting the webinar recording, Susan, as soon as we're able to get our IT folks fully vetting both the webinar and the slides. So look to our CDE website. We'll blast it through this CASI listserv so everyone can access it. And it'll also have the LAO FCMAT report. But if you can't wait, you can just Google the LAO website and they have it as a published report. It's a really good read. Even if you're not interested in non-classroom based schools, LAO and FCMAT do a beautiful overview of just charter school oversight, the part that Michelle went over. So it's a really nice primer for newer or first-time authorizers. So shameless plugs to make sure that people access the webinar that Kimberly did about the AMARD presentation performance categories, and also to take a deep dive into the LAO FCMAT report. Both of those are time well spent. And thanks, Dr. Johnson, for letting me take the microphone for just a minute. These are exciting developments in charters that I think a lot of us have been waiting for. So wanted to highlight places people can access them after today.
Thank you, Susan. We appreciate it. And Kimberly, thank you. Michael, thank you. Michelle, thank you. We are just grateful for all of your hard work and bringing this information to CASI. All right, we are going to quickly jump into breakout rooms. It's not going to be an awful lot of time because we really only have about 8 minutes left. Here is the Jamboard link. We want to thank Debbie, Mifula, Nisha, and Dave for being our facilitators. And so we're going to take just 5-6 minutes and we'll see you all in about 5 minutes. I know that was a really short breakout room. Is there anything that from the breakout rooms that we need to share out to the whole group?
I think in our breakout room in the northern section, we had some question about dependent charter schools. We also had some discussion around the non-classroom based. And I encourage anyone that has additional questions or needs additional information on either one of those topics to contact us through the CASI website. We're happy to provide some additional training to any school district or any county office that would like to have us come and present on those issues. Our training events are free of charge, so if anybody needs any support, we're here to help you. And thank you so much.
And I will say that from the central group, the question, someone brought up the fact that there will be changes to the elements in the petition under governing law, affirmations, student representatives, health and safety, admissions, and suspensions and expulsions. And so that was news to me, and we'll have to look into it and get back to folks next month.
From the Southern California region, we had a discussion on small districts and that all of the information that we talked about today are right now proposals, they're early recommendations, and that the encouragement should be that those that may be impacted by any of these recommendations, that they attend public comments and educational committees so that their voices are heard. And also in speaking about the performance categories, that any of our charters that may happen to be in a low performing area, that we keep data for every year of their term so that we can tell that story and assist in helping them get back to a category that is medium to high.
And then in the non-authorizing breakout, there were some quick responses. First one, there was a comment that there's a belief that there will be welcome some additional clarity about the oversight responsibilities, that in fact will be a welcome change when it may occur. There was also related to that a short discussion about possible timeframes for changes in law, with the idea that maybe not tomorrow, but probably some interest in having this stuff done before the next for the moratorium is lifted on non-classrooms, that is a reasonable time frame. And then there was a very short discussion, because that's all we had time for, about track 3 and how charter schools will do in the process, and the back and forth now that schools have been identified by the CDE.
All right. Well, thank you all for those breakout information. Next slide, please. We've already put it in the chat twice that we have a survey, and we really appreciate the feedback. At this moment, I'm looking at their survey responses, and there's only 2 responses. So we really do like receiving all the information so that we can make these programs better. And please fill out the survey. Please let us know what you're thinking. Next slide, please. And it is now 11:02, and we thank you all for your time. Again, thank you, FCMAT, thank you, LAO, thank you, AMARD. We truly appreciate all of your hard work and being a presenter here at CASI, and we appreciate our breakout room presenters as well. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.